Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sports Speak. I'm Jared Smith, and alongside me is Alexis Yoder,
Hey guys.
Ben Serfass,
How's it going?
and Jake Aferiat.
Howdy.
So let's get right into it with some wrestling talk today. So Penn State wrestling just finished up for the Big Ten championship, and we have our daily Collegian host, who are Ben and Jake, here to talk with us.
Okay, so
Alexis?
the first question we have for you guys is, obviously this atmosphere in the BJC was a lot different than prior Big Ten tournaments where, fans are screaming from all different kinds of schools, rooting for all of the different schools. So, Ben, I want to start with you. What was the atmosphere like in the BJC with just the teams and their families?
Obviously, it was different. It was not ideal. It was pretty bare inside that BJC, but it was still cool to be at a live sporting event. And one of the coolest things was you could hear a lot of the teams cheering each other on. Guys who weren't wrestling were in the stands. You could hear them yelling to their teammates, trying to encourage them. And you could also hear parents. Some parents, Jake and I were joking. Some of these wrestling parents are a little crazy, and you could really hear them, screaming down at their kids, depending who was wrestling, trying to get them to do one thing, acting like their coach. So a different environment, but a good one nonetheless.
When Ben and I were sitting there and, even to Ben's point about you could hear guys in the stands cheering their teammates on, you could it was pretty empty to the point where stuff down on the mat, you could hear coaches in the corners yelling at their guys and coaching them, which, anybody who's ever been to a wrestling match in Rec Hall or, anybody who's ever been to the BJC duel that they have every year, it's rocking. And, the atmosphere is just I'd be surprised if it doesn't register on the Richter scale or something. I mean, that's how crazy it is. And so, to go from what it was to now what it is, it was a little trippy at first, but, I think it also at least for me, in my perspective, I could focus more on the actual wrestling and what was going on the mat. And I didn't have to worry about all the noise behind me and being able to communicate with Ben or not. And, so it was definitely an interesting experience, I think is, the best way to describe it.
Yeah, that's really something that's interesting to be pointed out. So Iowa came out the victor, number one. Talk a little bit about that, Ben. How did Iowa dominate this competition? Did they dominate the competition for those that might not have been able to watch?
I mean, yeah, they certainly did dominate the competition. That was the expectation coming in. Penn State and Iowa obviously shared the regular season Big Ten championship, both went undefeated during the regular season. But despite Penn State's undefeated record, coming in, Iowa was the heavy favorite, and they proved it. They had a few champions. Penn State only had two. They did outscore them in team points by a little over 30, I believe. So, Penn State is a really young team. Iowa's kind of the opposite. They're a little older, more experienced. So this Big Ten tournament, I think, was more of just a learning experience for these Nittany Lions. I think they're going to do pretty well in the national tournament as well. But going forward, I think Penn State's in a very good position, despite not finishing maybe where they wanted to this year.
I understand. And Jake, if you can just really quickly touch on what do you think about Iowa's dominance?
Yeah. So, I mean, to Ben's point, they were expected to be the favorite coming in, and, Cale Sanderson sort of expressed that to us and that he knew it and that it was no secret. Nick Lee, who fell in the, 141-pound title bout, he said the same thing. So everyone knew that Iowa was the favorite. I mean, Penn State had 4 guys in the finals. Iowa had 6, and there were 3 Penn State-Iowa finals matchups. So, I mean, it's very clear who the top 2 teams in the conference are. But on some level, the difference between 1 and 2 might as well be the difference between, the first best team and the 5th best team. I memean, it was a young Penn State team that was there, and Iowa's got a lot of seasoned vets, a lot of guys who have been in these moments before. So I don't think anybody was really surprised by Iowa's performance. And listen, Penn State came in second place. Penn State is still sending 9 guys to the NCAA tournament, which is 90% of the team. So, there's no shame in that, and there's no shame in having, 2 out of 4 guys win Big Ten titles. But, Iowa was just sort of the all-around better team.
I understand.
And going off of that, you just said that Penn State had 2 guys win Big Ten titles in Aaron Brooks and RBY. Jake, how have they gotten to the point where they were winning Big Ten titles. Talk a little bit about their journeys to where they are now.
Yeah, sure. So, Rowan Bravo Young is 133 pounder, and he and Austin DeSanto, they've formed, one of the better rivalries, certainly in the sport at that weight class. Yesterday was the fifth time they faced off. Uh, Austin DeSanto took the first two meetings between them. RBY took the last two meetings, including uh, in a dual meet last year at Iowa, in the semifinals of last year's Big Ten tournament, and now this year for the Big Ten title. And RBY is a kid who, he's a really prolific offensive scorer. He's got a bunch of really great moves that he goes to, but I think the thing that was impressive to see and the thing that was good to see is he was able to win a low scoring bout. He only had two takedowns in the win. He won 5-2. And, he's a guy who usually likes to push the pace on offense and, really tire his opponents out. And the fact that he was able to do that and didn't need a ton of points to score shows, I think, just how dynamic he is and just, what he's capable of. And it's especially, he finished runner-up last year at the Big Ten tournament at 133 pounds. But, he's the type of guy who, and this is true of all the guys at Penn State, and this is something that, Cale Sanderson has stressed for a long time, is just not settling. And so, okay, if you win a Big Ten title, great, go out and win an NCAA title. Or, okay, you won your first Big Ten title by X number of points, go out and win your second Big Ten title by even more points. And so I think RBY definitely is one of the guys who buys into that the most and definitely epitomizes that. And then, for Aaron Brooks, there's never been any doubt about Brooks's talent or his potential or what he's capable of. He came into Penn State really highly decorated out of Maryland. He was on a couple of like U.S. junior world teams.
Mhm.
And then last year, he sort of burst onto the scene mid-season when Cale Sanderson pulled his red shirt, wrestled in a bunch of duels. I think only lost once, maybe in a duel, actually, to Taylor Venz, who is the guy who he beat in the finals this year at the Big Ten tournament. And the thing with Brooks is, again, he's super dynamic. He is just like, for my money, I think he's probably my favorite guy to watch on the team. But he suffered an injury, a leg injury in one of the opening rounds. I don't remember if it was the first round, second round. And like he walked off the mat and he was limping, and the trainers were looking at him. And so like we didn't know if he was gonna come back, because at that point he had already qualified for the national tournament. So like, that was sort of the first goal. And it's like, okay, is he going to injury default and not wrestle the rest of the tournament? But no, he came back from the injury. He was down in the match, and I think he came back and won 14-8. And then he sort of ran roughshod over the rest of the field and was very clearly the best guy at 184 pounds. And I think he came in probably as the favorite to win the title. And that's what he did. And he beat Taylor Venz again and sort of broke the series tie against them. So yeah, both guys, I think the expectations were high, and so I'm not surprised really that either of them, lived up to it.
Yeah, these are definitely the two most talented guys on Penn State's roster. And going in, like Jake said, these would probably be the two guys that you would bet on to win a Big Ten title. But Jake talked about RBY, saying he's someone who's bought into Cale Sanderson's theory that, Big Ten titles are great, but let's go win an NCAA title. RBY, he told us yesterday in his Zoom, Big Ten title, if it happens, it happens. Obviously, he's grateful to win it. It was a great accomplishment for him, his first in his career. But he's got his eyes set on nationals, and I think that's where you're going to really see him excel. I wouldn't be surprised if he's, has an NCAA title by the end of that tournament. And as far as Aaron Brooks goes, your original question was, how did they get to this point? Well, Aaron Brooks, since stepping onto the scene, like Jake said last season, he hasn't struggled really one bit. He's lost one duel, like he said. And he, again, other than the injury bout, which he came back and won pretty handedly, he didn't struggle at all yesterday. And I think, he's going to keep that momentum carrying into the national tournament as well.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Moving on, keeping the ball rolling here. Penn State wrestlers that didn't produce the results that were wanted. Who were they?
Yeah, listen, it's tough to say that guys didn't produce, the desired results. Because again, this is a really young team, 6 freshmen on the team. 5 out of the 6 freshmen qualified for the NCAA tournament, which, is tough to do, especially as a freshman, especially in the Big Ten. I think, people were high on Bo Bartlett at 149 pounds, especially because, Cale Sanderson had 3 very viable options at the weight. A lot of people thought he could have, maybe been a dark horse title contender. He wound up being the only guy not to qualify automatically for NCAA's. Cale Sanderson has said that they're hopeful that he gets an at-large bid. But he's a guy who people might look at and say, oh, it was kind of a disappointing tournament for him. But I hesitate again, especially when you're talking about 6 freshmen. I hesitate to say that anybody really disappointed. I think Nick Lee not winning a title, I think, especially given what happened last year. So, he lost by a point last year in the Big Ten title bout at 141 to a guy who he had beaten in the duel, and the guy who he had beaten in the duel meet was the number 1 ranked guy in the country. Nick Lee beat him and was number 1 heading into the Big Ten tournament, and then lost to the same guy by a point in the Big Ten title bout, and then to lose by a point yesterday in the Big Ten title bout. Again, I don't know if it's not the desired result, because obviously, these guys all want to win, but, I think perspective is also super important in that, again, it's a young team, and it's a team that, they like to peak at the NCAA tournament. They don't like to peak at the Big Ten tournament. So, what people might be perceiving as guys not meeting goals, not that it's part of the larger plan to go out and lose a Big Ten title, or to go out and lose, or to come in, like 3rd or 4th or 5th place or whatever. Not that that's part of the larger goal, but if there's anything that these guys are going to do, it's they're going to rebound. They're going to use this to learn, and they're going to use this to make sure that they improve upon their performance. At the NCAA tournament in like 10 days.
Got it. Perfect. Ben, switching up the question just a little bit for you. So the freshmen were, as Jake just said, not necessarily achieving the goals that were set, but weren't disappointing. What were their mat presence like?
Something Kale has talked about for many weeks now, because, it seems like always the question we're asking in media about these freshmen. He always says, yeah, they're freshmen. They don't have a ton of college experience, but they've wrestled in huge bouts through high school and leading up to this point. So he thought they'd be ready. I think, you noticed in the first session of wrestling on Saturday that some of the guys came out a little flat. But they certainly, did very, very well in the second session on Saturday, except for a few guys. Obviously Bartlett was the lone Penn Stater who did not qualify for nationals through the Big Ten tournament. But they certainly also did well. While they did have some guys who maybe didn't live up to some expectations coming in, they had a lot of guys excel. Robbie Howard finished 6th, I believe. Carter Starachi, a redshirt freshman, finished 2nd. So while they did have some freshmen who, are still learning and evolving and are going to get better, they also did have a lot of, underclassmen who really excelled given the circumstances.
All right, thank you. Ben, I want to go back to you with this question, and then we'll have Jay come in after you. What were some of the biggest or the best matches of the entire tournament? It doesn't have to be a championship match. It could have been something in the semifinals or around before that. Just what were some of the best matches to watch of this tournament?
I think Nick Lee's championship bout, Jake mentioned he lost by 1 point. It was a great match. And again, Jake mentioned Nick losing the last year's Big Ten tournament title bout by 1 point. And unfortunately, it happened again due to riding time. But he gave it a great effort. And it was something, as a fan, not as a fan, but as a reporter, you cover these guys. And it's tough not to feel for them when they lose these bouts. So it was good to see him, wrestle the way he did. I think he's got a lot of momentum going into nationals now. Again, Jake talked about not wanting to peak too early, so I wouldn't be worried at all about this. But it was a very close bout. Obviously, it had huge ramifications. A lot was riding on this in terms of Penn State. They weren't mathematically eliminated from the team battle at that point. I mean, obviously, Iowa was still way ahead at that point, but it would have been good to see Nick, a senior, get his first Big Ten title. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, but it was a great match nonetheless.
Yeah, no, so I'm going to go off the board a bit and go with two non-Penn State guys. Spencer Lee of Iowa at 125 pounds beat Devin Schroeder. I think it was 21-3 was the final score in that match. And I mean, Spencer Lee's a guy for Iowa who, a lot of people think he's going to be an Olympian. A lot of people think he could even be an Olympic medalist at 57 kilograms. And he's just, like, dominant is not even the right, like, I don't know if there's a right word in the dictionary to describe just how dominant Spencer Lee is and has been and how easy he makes it look. And it's honestly just like a joy to kind of watch him wrestle and go out there and compete and just really like have his way, with everyone. He's the best of the best. And at heavyweight also, Minnesota heavyweight Gable Stevenson is, I think for my money, probably, one of the best and most dynamic heavyweights that I've seen. He reminds me a lot of Anthony Cassar, a former Penn State national champ at heavyweight. I think he's maybe even better than Cassar now because Cassar only spent a year at heavyweight. But Stevenson took on Michigan's Mason Paris in the heavyweight title bout. And Stevenson did things that, you don't normally see guys at heavyweight do. And, he just, his presence on the mat and, his demeanor off the mat. He's not afraid to, talk some trash, banter a bit, have some fun. And I think it's just great for the sport, and he is redefining what it means to be a collegiate heavyweight. And I think that's such a great thing. So I would say those two bouts are probably my favorites.
Perfect. Well, we thank you both for joining us today on Sports Speak, and we'll definitely keep an eye on the NCAA tournament that is right around the corner.